Hola a todos, and we are here again to look this time at the role of support staff in comprehensive internationalization. So I'm going to do this in two parts. The first part we will reflect specifically on the role of the International Office, since that is probably where you're all working to a large extent. And then we'll look more generally at the role of other administrative or support staff in the university. This is the quote that you've seen several times, I believe, during the course of this particular module. And I just wanted to highlight here how this quote in particular, this definition rather in particular, highlights that internationalization is for all students and all staff. That is typically understood to be academic staff, but I would like you to think of it in the broader sense of all university staff, whether they are academic or administrative staff. This is something you can think about in your own time, but what do you consider are the blockers and enablers of internationalization of higher education? When we asked this question in a different study, we got some very interesting answers. In fact, we discovered that the majority of both blockers and enablers are people. So here you see it. In terms of enablers and blockers, the most likely group are staff themselves, so academic and administrative leadership. Therefore, any comprehensive strategy for internationalization should make an active effort to ensure that all staff become enablers of that process. If we think in terms of the professionalization of internationalization, we can see very clearly over time, and I'm sure you're noticing it in your own institution, that internationalization is becoming not just a core activity for the university, but also a more important management function. Universities are increasingly becoming more aware of both the potential benefits and risks of internationalization, and that is why they are taking a more strategic approach to the management of internationalization. They become more aware that there's a need to coordinate international activities and have a more efficient administration, and that they also need more effective leadership and management. And this, to a large extent, has led to what we could consider the raison d'etre of the International Office. So very often we have seen, as internationalization becomes more comprehensive, that the Internationalization Office itself grows in importance, moves more to the center of the organization, perhaps in the organization chart, sits closer to the senior management team, to the rector, president, vice chancellor, however that role might be defined in your institution. When we think a little bit about the staff in these international offices, once upon a time they came more traditionally from other university departments, and that may indeed be your own story as well. That to a large extent your career has developed through an experience of work in different university departments before coming to internationalization. But we can see a change in that as well, as increasingly the people who work in international offices tend to have been appointed specifically to that role because they bring specific knowledge, skills, competences. And whether it's around experience with intercultural skills, languages, but perhaps also as more management style skills such as project management, marketing, recruitment, and so on. We also see increasingly, and this program is an excellent example of that, how people who work in these offices are increasingly looking for means to improve their knowledge through professional development, and perhaps to gain qualifications that can then certify the knowledge that they have acquired, both on learning on the job but also through formal training processes. We also see how people who work in international offices become involved in different membership organisations. Many of you, I'm sure, were at the EIA in Seville just the other week, and increasingly see the benefits of networking, because that is where a lot of learning can take place, beyond actually improving the internationalisation of the institution itself. And we see also emerging very clearly this community of practice. You are 100 or so people online, you're interacting with different projects with one another, and so increasingly you are developing a community of practice, and all of that is feeding in very much to the work you do in your institutions and how you see internationalisation developing. And the more comprehensive the approach that the institution has taken, the more likely that your knowledge is being put to the wider benefit of the institution, rather than staying exclusively in the international office and the people you interact directly with. If we think then a little bit more now about the structures and functions of international offices and how these are changing with a more strategic, more comprehensive approach. Of course, we know that these vary widely. We know that there's no single or right model for internationalisation, that they will reflect your local circumstances and the institutional priorities. And for those of you who have been in the role for some time, no doubt you have seen change happening, that the role of the international office is shifting as the university sees internationalisation as more strategic and is probably developing a more comprehensive approach to how it delivers its international activities. Those of you who have been around long enough probably saw even the birth of the international office in your institution. Sometime it is created from scratch, ab initio, or other times it might emerge out of other offices, so from external relations offices or other international programs, projects, offices, or whatever. And we can't deny that this at times may lead to some territorial tensions if the job descriptions of these different offices are not clearly defined. Very often internationalisation is being spread across many different offices, and rightly so. But for that to work efficiently, there has to be good coordination and communication, and we'll talk about that later on in this module today. We see how the responsibilities for internationalisation is changing, and that very often new leadership positions are being created, either academic or management, so not just the head of the international office, but who that head of international office will report to. Will it be more of an academic or a management reporting line? And sometimes it's not that easy either, because as internationalisation spreads across perhaps different portfolios, the head of the international office may find him or herself reporting to a number of different people. And that has its challenges as well. We also know that as you become more strategic about internationalisation, another question that has to be addressed is whether or not that should be a central office managing the whole institution, or to what extent you will devolve internationalisation into the different departments and faculties. And at the same time then thinking carefully about what are those core functions that stay at central level. So all this move towards a comprehensive approach to internationalisation will have significant impact on how the international office itself evolves and how it interacts with other units in the institution. That said, it doesn't always mean that the International Office develops into a key function at the university. In some cases, we see that trend very clearly. It moves further up the organisation chart, sitting closer to senior management level. But at the same time, there are others, even though internationalisation is growing in importance, that it remains as an administrative unit more second tier and therefore has less influence on how internationalisation develops. And you can think about your own office, how that is developing. Are you being seen as increasingly strategic to senior management, or are you still perceived much more as an administrative office executing tasks rather than making strategic decisions? Of course, there is no right answer. It will depend very much on the institutional decision, the nature of their strategy, how they see the role of the International Office, and how they wish to see it playing a part in further development of internationalisation. We also see varied involvement then in internationalisation offices when it comes to strategy development. Some offices have direct responsibility and ownership in the development of a strategic plan, whereas others are much more of a background supportive role. Both of these are key and important, but again, it's important that you understand clearly in this development of strategy where you sit, what kind of role you're being expected to play. And I think that leads to this quote by a colleague of mine, John Taylor. On one hand, internationalisation is recognised as a core function within the university with clear strategic importance. On the other hand, many staff working in the international offices still feel themselves to be somewhat detached from the mainstream of the university. This appears to confirm the view that in professional terms, the work of the International Office is still evolving in terms of status and recognition. So I think you can reflect on that in your own situation now. I think many of you will feel this apparent contradiction that while comprehensive internationalisation, strategic internationalisation grows, it is not always necessarily reflected in the importance given to the people working in the International Office. Some of you may be in a more fortunate position, others less so, but interesting to reflect on how your own institution sees you as people performing a specific function in the internationalisation of the university. And so here are the questions for the assignment on this first part. I would like you to reflect on what the key changes have been in the role of the International Office at your university as internationalisation has become more strategic. And if you cannot see any changes, what does that then say about how the university sees the role of the International Office? And so since this is a group exercise, I would ask you to identify the trends that you can see across the group. What are the commonalities and what are the differences? And can you explain these in any way? So I think this is a useful point now to reflect on very much your own office and the institution, how you perceive comprehensive internationalisation, but also how the institution perceives you and your role. So I hope you find that an interesting reflection, and I look forward to reading your assignments. All the best.